أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ياسين والقرآن الحكيم إنك لمن المرسلين على صراط مستقيم تنزيل العزيز الرحيم لتنذر قوما ما أنذر آباؤهم فهم غافلون لقد حق القول على أكثرهم فهم لا يؤمنون إنا جعلنا في أعناقهم أغلالا فهي إلى الأذقان فهم مقمحون وجعلنا من بين أيديهم سدا ومن خلفهم سدا فأغشيناهم فهم لا يبصرون وسواء عليهم أنذرتهم أم لم تنذرهم لا يؤمنون إنما تنذر من اتبع الذكر وخشي الرحمن بالغيب فبشره بمغفرة وأجر كريم إنا نحن نحيي الموتى ونكتب ما قدموا وآثارهم وكل شيء أحصيناه في إمام مبين واضرب لهم مثلا أصحاب القرية إذ جاءها المرسلون إذ أرسلنا إليهم اثنين فكذبوهما فعززنا بثالث فقالوا إنا إليكم مرسلون قالوا ما أنتم إلا بشر مثلنا وما أنزل الرحمن من شيء إن أنتم إلا تكذبون قالوا ربنا يعلم إنا إليكم لمرسلون وما علينا إلا البلاغ المبين قالوا إنا تطيرنا بكم لئن لم تنتهوا لنرجمنكم وليمسنكم منا عذاب أليم قالوا طائركم معكم أئن ذكرتم بل أنتم قوم مسرفون وجاء من أقصى المدينة رجل يسعى قال يا قوم اتبعوا المرسلين اتبعوا من لا يسألكم أجرا وهم مهتدون وما لي لا أعبد الذي فطرني وإليه ترجعون أتخذ من دونه آلهة إن يردني الرحمن بضر لا تغني عني شفاعتهم شيئا ولا ينقذون إني إذا لفي ضلال مبين إني آمنت بربكم فاسمعون قيل ادخل الجنة قال يا ليت قومي يعلمون بما غفر لي ربي وجعلني من المكرمين وما أنزلنا على قومه من بعده من جند من السماء وما كنا منزلين إن كانت إلا صيحة واحدة فإذا هم خامدون يا حسرة على العباد ما يأتيهم من رسول إلا كانوا به يستهزئون ألم يروا كم أهلكنا قبلهم من القرون أنهم إليهم لا يرجعون وإن كل لما جميع لدينا محضرون وآية لهم الأرض الميتة أحييناها وأخرجنا منها حبا فمنه يأكلون وجعلنا فيها جنات من نخيل وعناب وفجرنا فيها من العيون يأكلوا من ثمره وما عملت أيديهم أفلا يشكرون سبحان الذي خلق الأزواج كلها مما تنبت الأرض ومن أنفسهم ومما لا يعلمون وآية لهم الليل نسلخ منه النهار فإذا هم مظلمون والشمس تجري لمستقر لها ذلك تقدير العزيز العليم والقمر قدرناه منازل حتى عاد كالأرجون القديم لا الشمس ينبغي لها أن تدرك القمر ولا الليل سابق النهار وكل في فلك يسبحون وآية لهم أنا حملنا ذريتهم في الفلك المشحون وخلقنا لهم من مثله ما يركبون وإن نشأ نغرقهم فلا صريخ لهم ولا هم ينقذون إلا رحمة منا ومتاعا إلى حين وإذا قيل لهم اتقوا ما بين أيديكم وما خلفكم لعلكم ترحمون وما تأتيهم من آية من آيات ربهم إلا كانوا عنها معرضين وإذا قيل لهم أنفقوا مما رزقهم الله قال الذين كفروا للذين آمنوا ونطعم من لو يشاء الله أطعمه إن أنتم إلا في ضلال مبين ويقولون متى هذا الوعد إن كنتم صادقين ما ينظرون إلا صيحة واحدة تأخذهم وهم يخصمون فلا يستطيعون توصية ولا إلى أهلهم يرجعون ونفخ في الصور فإذا هم من الأجداث إلى ربهم ينسلون قالوا يا ويلنا من بعثنا من مرقدنا هذا ما وعد الرحمن وصدق المرسلون إن كانت إلا صيحة واحدة فإذا هم جميع لدينا محضرون فاليوم لا تظلم نفس شيئا ولا تجزون إلا ما كنتم تعملون إن أصحاب الجنة اليوم في شغل فاكهون هم وأزواجهم في ظلال على الأرائك متكئون لهم فيها فاكهة ولهم ما يدعون سلام قولا من رب رحيم وامتازوا اليوم أيها المجرمون ألم أعهد إليكم يا بني آدم أن لا تعبدوا الشيطان إنه لكم عدو مبين وأن اعبدوني هذا صراط مستقيم ولقد أضل منكم جبلا كثيرا أفلم تكونوا تعقلون هذه جهنم التي كنتم توعدون اصلوها اليوم بما كنتم تكفرون اليوم نختم على أفواههم وتكلمنا أيديهم وتشهد أرجلهم بما كانوا يكسبون ولو نشاء لطمسنا على أعينهم فاستبقوا الصراط فأنى يبصرون ولو نشاء لمسخناهم على مكانتهم فما استطاعوا مضيا ولا يرجعون ومن نعمره ننكس في الخلق أفلا يعقلون وما علمناه شعر وما ينبغي له إن هو إلا ذكر وقرآن مبين لينذر من كان حيا ويحق القول على الكافرين أولم يروا أنا خلقنا لهم مما عملت أيدينا أنعاما فهم لها مالكون وذللناها لهم فمنها ركوبهم ومنها يأكلون ولهم فيها منافع ومشارب أفلا يشكرون واتخذوا من دون الله آلهة لعلهم ينصرون لا يستطيعون نصرهم وهم لهم جند محضرون فلا يحزنك قولهم إنا نعلم ما يسرون وما يعلنون أولم ير الإنسان أنا خلقناه من نطفة فإذا هو خصيم مبين وضرب لنا مثلا ونسي خلقه قال من يحيي العظام وهي رميم قل يحييها الذي أنشأها أول مرة وهو بكل خلق عليم الذي جعل لكم من الشجر الأخضر نارا فإذا أنتم منه توقدون أوليس الذي خلق السماوات والأرض بقادر على أن يخلق مثلهم بلى وهو الخلاق العليم إنما أمره إذا أراد شيئا أن يقول له كن فيكون فسبحان الذي بيده ملكوت كل شيء وإليه ترجعون. سورة المباركة الفاتحة.
मर मोहम्मद वाली मोहम्मद सलावत। फातिमा सुगरा ने ये बाबा को लिखा है। फातिमा सुगरा ने ये बाबा को लिखा है। बीमार हूँ मरती हूँ, बीमार हूँ मरती हूँ, ये सब तुमको पता है। फातिमा सुगरा ने ये बाबा को लिखा है। जिस रोज से देखा है मुहर्रम का नया चाँद, जिस रोज से देखा है मुहर्रम का नया चाँद, ये कैसे लिखूं बाबा, ये कैसे लिखूं बाबा, के दिल टूट गया है। फातिमा सुगरा ने ये बाबा को लिखा है। फातिमा सुगरा ने ये बाबा को लिखा है। वादा तो किया बाबा निभाने नहीं आए, वादा तो किया बाबा निभाने नहीं आए। बीमार से किस बात पे, बीमार से किस बात पे मुँह फेर लिया है। फातिमा सुगरा ने ये बाबा को लिखा है। फातिमा सुगरा ने ये बाबा को लिखा है। बाबा मुझे दस्ती है ये तन्हाई वतन की, बाबा मुझे दस्ती है ये तन्हाई वतन की, ये घर की उदासी है, ये घर की उदासी है, तो फिर कब्र में क्या है। फातिमा सुगरा ने ये बाबा को लिखा है। फातिमा सुगरा ने ये बाबा को लिखा है। लौटा है गर शाम के होते ही परिंदे, लौटा है गर शाम के होते ही परिंदे, कुनबा मेरा क्यों अब भी, कुनबा मेरा क्यों अब भी सफर में रहा है। फातिमा सुगरा ने ये बाबा को लिखा है। फातिमा सुगरा ने ये बाबा को लिखा है। तुम जब से गए घर से ये घर कब्र है मेरी, तुम जब से गए घर से ये घर कब्र है मेरी। मैं जिंदा है ऐसे के, मैं जिंदा है ऐसे के, कोई लाशापदा है। फातिमा सुगरा ने ये बाबा को लिखा है। फातिमा सुगरा ने ये बाबा को लिखा है। बाबा मेरा इस घर का तो कुछ हाल सुनाओ, बाबा मेरा इस घर का तो कुछ हाल उस बेज़बान ने मुझको कभी याद किया है। कद फातिमा सुगरा ने ए बाबा को लिखा है। कद फातिमा सुगरा ने ये बाबा को लिखा है। सलावत।
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Dr. Sayyid Shabbir Kirmani, respected elders, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Surah Fatiha is requested for the Salah Sawab of the marhumin listed on the screen and for all marhumin. Al-Fatiha. Ayam Nujibu is requested for the names listed on the screen and for all those who need here and elsewhere. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. أما يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه يكشف السوء. 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 Children's Workshop. On Wednesday, September 11th, the workshop for children ages 4 to 10 will be held during the main program in the classroom upstairs. Please use the stairs located near the dining hall. Flu shot clinic. Masjid al-Hayy has once again coordinated flu shots for both men and women aged 18 and above. The vaccinations will be available at the Masjid on Thursday, September 12th, starting at 8:30 p.m. At this time, I'd like to call Dr. Sayyid Shabbir Kirmani for tonight's lecture with a loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. فوض أمري إلى الله إن الله بصير بالعباد ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. حسبنا الله ونعم الوكيل ونعم المولى ونعم النصير. والصلاة والسلام والتحية والإكرام على الرسول المسدد المصطفى الأمجد المحمود الأحمد الذي سمي في السماء بأحمد وفي الأرض بأبي القاسم محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى أهل بيت الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين المنتجبين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا. اللهم صل. وقل رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. أما بعد، قال الله تبارك وتعالى في كتاب الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل لا أسألكم عليه أجرا إلا المودة في القربى. صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل. My respected elders, brothers and sisters in Islam and Iman here in Florida or across the globe, wherever you may be hearing my voice, Salamun alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Question, what is spiritual radiance? When you come to look at the lives of the examples that Allah has sent for you and I, Allah has sent various examples in various forms, in various times, in various zaman, in various makan. And it's important for us to reflect on these personalities and what guidance they give us. Throughout the Quran, Allah gives us examples of personalities for better and for worse. Those examples which bring us towards ihdina as-sirat al-mustaqim, towards the straight path, and those who are ghayr al-maghdubi alayhim wal-dhalin. And you'll find even in the books before, the divine guidances before, the Bible in its original form, the likes of the other suhuf or scriptures that were sent before, Allah has given examples of personalities by giving us archetypes. The same way Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam said, "Mithli la yuba'u mithla." One like me cannot do bay'ah to one like him. And so when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses names in the Quran, for better or for worse, He's giving examples of archetypes that help us understand what we should follow and what we should not follow. We should try to follow the examples of Ibrahim, the example of Musa, the example of Isa, the example of Rasulullah. We should try to follow those good examples. But we should also try to stay away from those negative examples, such as Fir'aun, such as Qarun, such as Shaddad, such as Haman, such as XYZ, Namrud, and you go down the line. And so now when we come to this illustrious personality who we are here to look at, you'll find that at times Allah gives us examples that are male, sometimes they are female, and sometimes they are old, sometimes they are young. And Allah has given examples in a variety of ways. Amongst these examples for us to learn from is the illustrious personality of Bibi Fatima al-Masuma, who is of Qum. And in this, the sister of Imam al-Rida, what is this personality? Who is this personality? And what does she teach us? Tonight, I want to look at with you, in the few moments that we have, the radiance of Qum, the piety, the knowledge, and the spirituality, as well as the empowerment of this great lady. So what does this all mean? What is her position and why is it so important? Number one. Number two, how did she give us an example for men and women about certain traits that she had, such as her knowledge, such as her courage, such as her audacity, such as her ability to inspire that we should learn and take lessons from. The next element is, how is her spiritual being so elevated that many people, scholars, solved some of the biggest problems by her door, by her spiritual realm? And how can we learn from that? And finally, it being a night where we commemorate this blessed lady, we'll connect our hearts to the tragedy of the Ahlul Bayt and revive our hearts with it to ensure that they are beating spiritually and for here and for time and memorial, inshallah. This is our agenda for tonight. Wherever you are here in Florida or across the globe, Sanna salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma sallam. At the first level, one of the reformations that the Prophet came was to try to reform people's vision of the zahir, try to change and reform their vision of the apparent. That is to say that the world had divided people by color, by language, by lisan, by other factors, men and women, in the sense that we saw these superiorities or inferiorities related to them. So in that world, in that part of the world, if someone had, for example, the ability to, they came from Arab, and they spoke a particular dialect, it was considered superior. If they didn't, for example, they were considered ajami, and they were discriminated against. At times, that was whether it's skin color for sure, and at times it was also based on not necessarily skin color, just the idea of language. Salman may have looked similar in skin color to many of the people there in the Arabian belt, but his language was different, and so they would say as a taunt to him, Farsi, for example. And then the Rasulullah said, Salmanu minna ahl al-bayt. So now, coming to this, similarly, they had thought that a woman, because of their vision of a lady, was, for example, either burying them alive in some instances, not all of them did that, but some of them did, or the idea of a woman is not to speak out, a woman is not to have societal power, for example. Islam came to reform this and say, just as a man can get educated, a woman should get educated. As Rasulullah said very clearly, طَلَبُ الْعِلْمِ فَرِيضَةٌ عَلَى كُلِّ مُسْلِمٍ وَمُسْلِمَةٍ. This riwayah has been given in two ways. طَلَبُ الْعِلْمِ فَرِيضَةٌ عَلَى كُلِّ مُسْلِمٍ, period, full stop. And it's also been said as Muslim or Muslima. But if you know Arabic, Muslim in the context of the first, that tense includes both genders already. It's like saying it's an obligation on all Muslims to obtain knowledge. It's like saying all humankind, regardless of gender. But anyways, in other ways, please, it's been completely deciphered that men and women, number one. So education was vital for men and women, number one. This is something is really important because sometimes the narrative today has become that certain people in the world, they start saying, oh, Islam doesn't have room for women to get educated. In some unfortunate misconstruing dynamics of people trying to use political power or whatever power they're trying to keep, the reality of the matter is that's not Islam. That's tribalism, that's culture or other aspects which have hijacked Islam. And you can look at this more in detail on your own time. The second element or the second dynamic of this is Islam's prestige of the spiritual elevation of women. So now Islam came forward and said, this is very important when people highlight today, especially out of context, some of the sayings of the Ahlul Bayt. For example, sometimes people read Nahjul Balagha and they, out of context, not necessarily for any nefarious reasons, but they sometimes read some of the aqwal or the sayings of Imam Ali alayhi salam, and they think that was Imam Ali, na'udhu billah min dhalik, khuda na khasta, was he someone who was a misogynist, that he used to look at women as inferior? Sometimes when you read some lines of Nahjul Balagha, you may think this. But of course, if you examine one simple thought experiment with me, you'll understand how this is far from the truth. For example, in the domain of men and women and spiritual elevation, was it always that men were elevated? Was it always that women were elevated? Was it sometimes the case that men are elevated, sometimes women are elevated? Let's take the example of Asiya. Asiya, the wife of Fir'aun. In spiritual elevation, it's clear that his wife Asiya was elevated as compared to Fir'aun. You don't think Imam Ali knew this example? That some women outpaced their husbands? That she doesn't know the example of these personalities who are elevated? For example, Maryam, who without even a husband, she's elevated beyond many of the men. And so, of course he knew this. So these are sometimes circumstantial things that the Imam was saying, and they need to be understood in context, and it's important to keep those things in mind. Further than this, when you look at the life of Bibi Fatima herself, the life of Bibi Zainab salamullahi alayha, or indeed the life of Bibi Masuma Qom, you realize that they helped us understand that knowledge was the domain of not only men, it was of women, and sometimes women outpaced. Another third element that I'll add to this to help us remember this is the works of Ayatollah Ali Naqi Naqavi, where he said, look, when I looked at certain things, I found there was distinction among certain personalities that even certain other people didn't have. For example, when Imam Hassan alayhi salam, that we are a hujjah on the people, and our grandmother Fatima al-Zahra is a hujjah on us, what does that mean? And he says that's not something that is a small thing, that's a major reality. And so when he analyzed this, he looked at this in the context of Rasulullah, who all Muslims accept. When Bibi Fatima would stand or come in the gathering where Rasulullah was, the Prophet himself, Khatmur Rasul, he would stand up and he would give Fatima a seat there. Why? So Ali Naqi Naqavi says, look, hold on a second. Is this a hujjah? That is, did all the Imams practice this? So he went afterwards and he looked at all the lives of the Imams and he said, no, I didn't find any of the Imams, Imam Ali, Imam Hassan, Imam Hussein, or any of the Imams standing up for their daughters and giving them their seat. If this was a hujjah, then all of them would have practiced this. And so the reality was, he said this was one leader, rahbar, spiritual leader, giving respect to another spiritual leader. And so this is something that's extremely important to understand, that Fatima al-Zahra may even outpace Imams in her maqam spiritually. What that truly means, Allah knows, and maybe we'll find out on Yawm al-Qiyamah. As we're told that the maqam of Fatima al-Zahra is, it is a sir, a secret from amongst the secrets of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, Allahumma salli ala. Now when it comes to this blessed lady who we're commemorating tonight, Bibi Fatima al-Masuma, she is, as you know, a brief biographical sketch. She is, of course, the daughter of the 7th Imam, and the 7th Imam, Imam al-Kadhim, had upwards of, narrations say, 30 children. He had the most children of the Imams. And it's Allah's wisdom that despite how much opposition and oppression and imprisonment he faced, Allah made arrangements for him to have this large progeny, number one. Number two, 2, he had many daughters. Of them, 4 of them, they say, were named Fatima. Now, these are for us to understand, but the name that the scholars have said is, for example, there's Fatima al-Kubra, Fatima al-Sughra, Fatima al-Wusata, Fatima al-Ukhra, for example. So these are the 4 Fatimas, right? The older, the younger, the middle, the last one. And these are for us to understand in terms of keeping track of these personalities. And you'll find that the names have an impact. You know, today we look for beautiful names for our children. In fact, that's one of the responsibilities. A parent should look for good names for their children. But you'll find that even in the Ahlul Bayt, you'd say, why didn't they come up with other names? In fact, if you recall, Imam Hussein alayhi salam himself said that your first son is named Ali, then your second one is Ali, then the third one is Ali, there's Ali Akbar, there's Ali Awsat, there's Ali Asghar. So what's the matter? He said, the Imam said, had I had 1,000 sons, I would name them all Ali. The principle was the love of this personality of Amir al-Mu'mineen, that it shows the best attributes and traits. Perhaps if one asked Imam al-Kadhim that if he had 1,000 daughters, he would have named all of them Fatima. The principle being that these names have an impact. In fact, you'll find that when a person came to the 6th Imam and he said, Ibn Rasulullah, I've had a daughter. So what did you name her? He said, I've named her Fatima. He said, now, he stopped and he paused. He said, now that you've named her that, you must treat her in such a manner. That means you should not disrespect her in any way. That name needs to be sanctified. So these are principles that we should keep in mind. If we have these names, we should also treat one another in that way. You know, sometimes we say that someone their name is this and their name is that. Now you may say and I may say, because we judge people sometimes inadvertently, I hope, not intentionally, but you know, this person, I know their reality. And the reality is we don't know people's full reality. Allah knows the dynamics. So even at least at a minimum out of people's names, we should respect one another and have this ahkam. I remind myself first and foremost that remember the hurma of a mu'min, of a believer, is greater than the Kaaba. Imagine you go to the Kaaba, you know, when you go, for example, to throw the stones on shaitan, some people get very aggressive, they throw shoes, they get all of this frustration out and they're throwing it on this thing, these pillars. But imagine you start, God forbid, throwing things on the Kaaba. I mean, people will take you and they may split you apart. But the reality is sometimes we do this to mu'mineen all the time and we don't even realize it. That is, we are only looking at the zahir, and this is a very important point which I'll come to a little bit later in the lecture, is how there may be zahir manifestations, but the spiritual implications may be profound and we may not recognize it. I'll come to that in a moment. Now, there's a moment where this great lady is in the city, when one of the times where Imam al-Kadhim is free, before he went to Baghdad, when he's, for example, in Medina. And in this era, some of the believers, they come to visit the Imam. When they come to visit the Imam is out of town. He's gone for a day trip, for example. And when he's gone for this trip, eventually what happens is that at that junction, these believers who come from a far distance, they came to ask the Imam some questions. When they came to ask the Imam some questions, they stayed for, an hour or two. Today, if someone's not there, we start texting left, right, and center, calling, well, where are they? There was a time, some of you remember, they used to have pay phones. There was a time before cell phones. There's a time where you don't know where someone is until they show up at the end of the day or something like this. So, they didn't exactly know when the Ahlul Bayt, when Imam al-Kadhim will be back precisely. They didn't know. So eventually they were waiting for an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. When it began to become really late, they said, we got to go back. So eventually when they were about to go back, they had their questions. Bibi Fatima and Masuma says, maybe I can help you with your questions. And they said, we have nothing to lose. This is the daughter of the Imam, maybe she can give us a guidance. They asked the questions. The daughter of the Imam al-Kadhim, Bibi Fatima al-Masuma, the sister of Imam al-Rida, the one we are here to commemorate, she answered each and every one of the questions to the satisfaction of those who were asking. And they left in a state where they were joyous about the fact that they had gotten their questions answered so satisfactorily. Now, the narration says when they began to depart and go back to their homeland, on the way back, eventually the Imam was coming back towards the city when they were leaving the city to go back to their hometown. And they intersected one another and intercepted one another. And when they met each other, they said, Salamu alaykum wa alaykum as-salam. They said, Yabna Rasulullah, we're so glad we had got to do your ziyarah. We came to, for example, meet you, ask some questions, but we were told you're out of town. And so we had these questions, and eventually we were departing, and at that point the Imam said, what's the questions? And he says, well, actually your daughter answered them for us. I said, really? At that point, the Imam says, may I see the answers? They had written down the answers. The Imam takes the letter, sees the questions, sees the answers when reading them, and he says a line. And this line needs to be understood in context of what the Ahlul Bayt teach us. He says, he reads it and he says, Fidaha abuha, Fidaha abuha, Fidaha abuha. Fidaha abuha meaning, may her father be sacrificed for her. May her father be sacrificed for her. Meaning, may he be sacrificed for his daughter. What statement that is? Number one, because the ulama says, our a'imma don't do mubalagha. They don't do exaggeration. They don't do hyperbole. So when they're saying that, there's some substance there, number one. Number two is what respect between father and son, but also the respect of the spiritual maqam of this lady that this Imam is exhibiting. Remember, Imam al-Kadhim is one of Babul Hawa'ij, right? The Imam's spiritual status is very high. Even our brothers in general in Islam, they have historically always accepted the maqam of Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam, Imam al-Shafi and others, for example. So this person is saying this about this lady. It tells you something about her spiritual reality. Second, next point is the following. Now when it comes to this great lady, you'll find that her piety is noteworthy. One of the things that the ulama mark is that she did not marry. And why is that? That's an interesting discussion in and of itself, that it's highly emphasized in Islam to marry, and she didn't. One of the reasons, we don't 100% know why, but one of the reasons ulama mark is perhaps it may be that there was no kufu for her, there was no spiritual equal. You know, there's this term you must have heard, kufu, compatibility. It's something that comes up especially when people get married. But we've sometimes misconstrued kufu. Kufu, in our modern terms, often means material or bank balance or, account kufu. That's not Islam's definition of kufu. Kufu means spiritual, religious proximity and compatibility with one another. And so it's possible that someone doesn't have a spiritually compatible person. Example, Imam Ali alayhi salam, Rasulullah himself says that had Fatima al-Zahra not had Ali al-Murtada, there would have been no one to marry Fatima al-Zahra. She wouldn't have gotten married, because the only person who could have married her was Ali al-Murtada because of the spiritual compatibility between them. Otherwise, there was no possibility. Similarly, it's possible that there was no one who was spiritually compatible with the likes of this great personality at that time. The only person would be her own mahram, who was her brother, for example. And so that was obviously off the table. So the reality of the matter is it would be something that this is one theory. Another theory is maybe to hide her personality and persona or maqam. And there's a lot of other theories, but keep that in mind in terms of the sanctity. Marriage is something that we are told it elevates a person, elevates their maqam. At the same time, there are highly esteemed personalities who didn't marry. This is one example. Another example is Bibi Maryam alayhi salam herself, right? The mother of Isa alayhi salam. So you'll find these dynamics, and these are noteworthy for us to consider. The next element is her spiritual being and her spiritual guidance that teaches us so much. What do I mean? You know, when it comes to this, it's important to keep these things in mind. I want to share a few things with you. We live sometimes in the material realm, and for us, sometimes it's very difficult to fathom the other world, to fathom the different alameen. For example, there's different alameen in the sense of, when we say Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, sometimes we just think material. Earth, universe, sun, planets, stars, and the galaxies, which is one dimension. But that's not, or one aspect. But it's not the whole picture. Meaning what? There's different malakut from the spiritual realm. There's different states from the spiritual realm. For example, alame dhar, alame malakut, alame jabarut, alame lahut. And you can go down the list. And all of these, there's a physical manifestation in our world, but there's also alame nasud. There's other elements that have a different manifestation that we can't fathom. And I'll also try to come to that if time permits. So now, keeping all of these things in mind, Ayatollah Najafi Marashi. Ayatollah Najafi Marashi, you'll recall, he's that scholar who spent all of his life trying to get rare manuscripts and put them together and keep them together. To the point that he used to take loans from his students in order to get books that were very rare. He has the largest library in the world, or in Asia, which is in Iran, and he's buried therein. His father, not himself, but his father, who was an alim himself, Ayatollah Mahmud Marashi, he's someone who did an amal for 40 days to be able to see where is the shrine of Bibi Fatima al-Zahra. Where is she buried? Now, as you know, his son is someone who emphasized Bibi Fatima Zahra's maqam a lot, is Ayatollah Najafi Marashi. That in his wasiyah to his son, he wrote 25 points. 3 of them, he said, directly relate to Fatima Zahra. He said, my son, make sure that you always, for example, you recite tasbih of Fatima Zahra. Not only after salah, but whenever you're in difficulty. Because Rasulullah gave this to Fatima Zahra in her time of need. Number 1. Number 2, and if there was anything better, he would have gave that. So number 1. Number 2, he said that always, for example, make sure you never neglect the khutbah fadakiyah. The khutbah fadak that Fatima Zahra gave, he said, study it. He said some of the biggest intellectuals have neglected this sermon of the Arabic language, of Islam and science. All of them many of them neglected it. Study it, remember it. In fact, for Shias, historically, one of the signs of being a Shia was that you would memorize that khutbah by heart in Arabic throughout the generations, wherever you would go. It was a sign of Shias throughout times, especially during eras of taqiyya, high taqiyya rates. The third element, he said, is always make sure that you recite in your qunut of salah, بحق فاطمة وأبيها وبعلها وبنيها وسر المستودع فيها أن تصلي على محمد وآل الطاهرين. Ya Allah, by Fatima, her husband, her father, her sons, and the secret with which she is buried. What that secret is? What's that secret? Does anyone know? Baba, secret is a secret. It's not meant to be known. We won't know here. So anyways, he had this wish that I know where she's buried. As you know, in our traditions, there are some things that are popular and there's some things that may be more accurate. So for example, popular, it may be that, for example, people say that Bibi Fatima is buried in Jannatul Baqi. It's popular, not necessarily accurate. As you know, Imam Ali alayhi salam, he made many false graves when she was martyred. So because they wanted to dig up her grave, they were saying that we were not part of this burial, we want to be part of this burial. And so at that point, Imam Ali became very upset and he said, I'll make it, rain blood here if anyone tries to dishonor Fatima Zahra. As in, he drew his sword at that junction. In this environment, in this situation, in this circumstance, one is that she's buried in Jannatul Baqi. Another is that Rasulullah said, Rawdatan min Riyadh al-Jannah. Next to his mimbar is Riyadh al-Jannah. That is one area, the garden by the garden of Rasulullah. That may be another area. And another theory is that she's buried in her own room, her own hujra, in her own home. Many scholars say the last option is more probable, likely, and more authentic. But the first one is very known and famous. So it's not necessarily that something's famous, it's also the same. Another example is, where is Bibi Zainab buried? You'll have, for example, we often hear Sham. This is one of the theories. There's other theories. One theory is Medina itself. Another theory is Cairo in Egypt. And there are reasons behind each theory. One theory is that, for example, the head of Imam Hussein was in Cairo. And by the way, scholars have very strong opinions on all of these different views. We sometimes say black and white, one or the other. Similarly, why am I saying this? There's many things that are popular, but there's differences of opinion on the truth. So now, anyways, Ayatollah Marashi Najafi's father, Ayatollah Mahmud Marashi, he wanted to know where Bibi Fatima is buried. Eventually, now some of these visions that the ulama have, they are sometimes made public. Many times they're not made public at all. But sometimes when there is a wisdom that can benefit broader society, it's made public. So for example, when it comes to, and our scholars have said also in, for example, masaib and these things, we shouldn't be using like dreams and these things as a hujjah. They're definitely not something as an authority and a proof. But sometimes scholars do share some spiritual experiences that may have a betterment for other societies. This is a case-by-case basis. Anyways, I'm sharing it on that basis. So this individual, this great scholar himself, he did this amal for 40 days, and eventually what happens is he sees Amir al-Mu'mineen in a vision. And he says that, what's the meaning of this dua, this amal, this supplication, these du'as that you're doing? And he says, I'm wanting to know where is the grave of my mother. He's a Sayyid, he wants to know where is the grave of my mother, Fatima Zahra, so I can go and I can do pay my respects and do my ziyarah and do all of these things. And eventually, he says, as for that, it's a secret between me and Rasulullah that I'm not to divulge while I'm in this alam. And so, but he says, why do you not go to the ziyarah of the lady in Qum? Meaning who? Meaning Fatima al-Masuma. That ziyarah is considered tantamount to the ziyarah of Fatima al-Zahra in her absence. Meaning, we don't have access to the ziyarah of Fatima Zahra directly. In that absence, Allah has made, this is a gateway for us to get that ziyarah in some sense. This is something that should not be neglected. You know why that's so important? You remember Ayatollah Burjadi, who I mentioned a few days ago, or so a week or two ago in Jum'ah, that his teacher was Ayatollah Jahangir Khan Kashkai, the one who played the sitar until the age of 40. His student, Ayatollah Burjadi, great scholar. There was an Arab from the Gulf, a big sheikh who wanted to come visit him, out of respect to him. They sometimes say the Shah, or they say this Arab sheikh, whatever it was. And he said he refused to meet him. And they asked him, why would you refuse to meet him? He said that I know this person's disposition, and I know he may come to see me, and maybe he has some political tilt and motive, and he's trying to get my loyalty, but he won't go and meet Bibi Masuma al-Qum. And I see that as disrespect of her. That someone would come to meet me, a servant like me, but not go and visit the great lady who this city is in its protection and custody of. So that's something to keep in mind and keep at the heights of it. The final element, which I'm going to draw all of these things together and bring it to a close, is how do we see the spiritual realm? You know, we've been and the philosophers of the last 200 years have really impacted our view of the world by seeing the world purely materially. And what that means is, materialism is very important, but it's a means to an end. I'll give you an example. The same way everything here has a physical manifestation, there may be another manifestation of that in the spiritual realm. I'll give you an example. They asked Ayatollah Mutahhari, which was the scholars and the teachers did you find the most elevated in your eyes, in your view? So they're asking a scholar about his. He said, all of these teachers that I've benefited from have been tremendous, but especially I have a keen place in my heart for Allama Tabatabai, Sahib Tafsir al-Mizan, Allama Muhammad Hussain Tabatabai. He said, why? Someone may think, oh, because he's written Tafsir al-Mizan, he knows philosophy, he knows this subject, he knows mathematics, he knew Riyaziyat, he knew physics, he knew poetry. He really knew a lot of sciences and arts. He said, no. He said, you know why? Because of his reverence for the Ahlul Bayt, his love of the Ahlul Bayt. I said, what? He said, I have so much respect for this man because of his love of the Ahlul Bayt. He said, what? He said, how? He said, you know how he used to open his fast, his roza in Shahr Ramadan? How do you and I open our roza, date, kujur, for example, water, for example, salt, mashallah, different things. You know how he used to open it? Ayatul Mutahhari says, he would go to the shrine of Bibi Masuma and he would kiss the zari. That's how he'd open his fast. You see, sometimes we're only looking at the food of our physical bodies, but our spirit, our ruh, our spirituality also is seeking something. And that food that we give it, that nourishment is just as important, if not more important. And so you may see this as something that it's hard to reconcile with the lens that we see the world with, but in the spiritual dimensions, there may be something that you're eating that you say in the material realm, amazing, fantastic, is amazing, but in the spiritual realm, your spiritual body, so to speak, is saying, I wish you could have given me something better. You just gave me, for example, spiritual fast food. You just gave me spiritual junk food. You just gave me spiritual X, Y, and Z. And so this is where the lens has to shift in terms of how we see the world and how we see the view of the reality. Same way, sometimes you could eat something very simple. For example, jaw. Imam Ali used to eat barley bread, sometimes dried up barley bread. In the world's dynamics, you would say, like, people wouldn't even bat an eye on that. They'd be like, how dare you? We take things for granted, especially in a world where we waste so much food. But in the spiritual realm, the spirit may say, that's the best food I could get. By the way, nutrition in the spiritual realm in Islam is a big part of it. Ayatollah Bahjat, you should see what his nutritional plan was when he was on the spiritual journey. Believe me, as much as I love biryani and plow, it was not biryani and plow. And so it was something that was very simple and very humble. Again, it's not for you and I, but I'm saying that has a big impact. Today, we're finding that our nutrition has a big impact, not only on our physical bodies, but also our intellect, our mental mind state. It has a big impact on our energy levels. It has a big impact on many aspects of our lives. And so these are some things that we should consider. So now, at this junction, when we're looking at this great personality in her life, this is what I wanted to draw your attention to. How did she inspire people to solve some of their greatest problems, their greatest issues? There's three great philosophers that you need to know in Islamic philosophy. Ibn Sina or Avicenna, Suhrawardi, and of course Mullah Sadra. Mullah Sadra is the more recent of them. Mullah Sadra, or Sadruddin al-Shirazi, is one of our great Shia scholars. And he's someone who reconciled irfan, Islamic spirituality, and many other things. By the way, some Shia scholars, of course, Mullah Sadra was a Shia scholar, but sometimes people don't understand in your own times. For example, Allama Iqbal, 100 years ago, every Maulana gave a fatwa on him that he's a kafir, essentially, because they didn't understand his vision. Same thing with Mullah Sadra. 400 years ago, they used to sit at the gate of the haram of Bibi Masuma, and they used to do a tasbih of la'na on him. Shia scholars used to. Because they didn't understand the depths of what he had done. And sometimes people are just way ahead of their time. Anyways, Mullah Sadra reconciled a lot of these things. So for example, he said he reconciled the views of Ibn Sina. For example, Ibn Sina, who was also a physician, as well as his book Al-Qanun fi Tib, the canon of medicine, was used as a textbook in medical schools across the world up until 400 years ago. He was also someone who was a mufassir of the Quran. He wrote a tafsir of the Quran. But he said, look, ruh exists before the physical body. And he had his views on this. Mullah Sadr said no. And he said the example, he gave the word harkatul jawhariya. If you remember in math class, there was discrete and continuous variables. And so he helped the world realize that things are not just discrete. They actually are in a state of flow. They're in a state of movement. They're in a state of transcendence. And I'm telling you all of this for a very simple reason, but bear with me here. Anyways, eventually he came forward and he said no. He said the way this actually operates is there is the physical body, the ruh doesn't exist without the physical body, but it doesn't come in the physical body automatically. And he gives the istidlal from the Quran and other traditions that basically what happens is once the potentiality elevates of the physical being, then the ruh is inserted. For example, Allah says, that going through the different stages of embryology, in the Islamic view also, the ruh is not immediately in the physical body, in the zygote. It's over a certain period, some say 4 months or so, that when the ruh enters into the physical body. I'm not trying to open Pandora's box here, but he helped reconcile this. But he said that once it enters into the physical, it migrates and it stays eternal after that. So he believed that reincarnation could happen in the spiritual, mystical realm. So he said, for example, the example for us is like, for example, when a butterfly is in the cocoon stage, before it becomes a butterfly, it sheds all of its past, breaks out of the cocoon, and it releases as a butterfly. He says, when we leave this world, our physical body stays behind, but there's a spiritual manifestation of that body which elevates and goes to the higher realms of barzakh and beyond. So the same way, this would reconcile a lot of the things that we say, oh, how is it that we will look like such and such or this and that in barzakh? And this, he solved many of these problems. Anyways, why am I telling you all of this? This same scholar who gave Hikmatul Jawhariya, transcendental philosophy, many other things to the world, he himself says, and he wrote in many places in his books, that when I had my biggest problems, intellectual problems that I couldn't solve, these are, by the way, world problems. He solved Islamic philosophy problems, not just for you and I, but at an international level. He said, I would go to the shrine of Bibi Masuma al-Qum and I would pray there. And it was from there that I got some of my biggest problems solved. I got the inspiration for the answers. So when I say this, as her being an exalted radiance of Qum in terms of her piety, knowledge, spirituality, and her empowerment is the spiritual empowerment that I'm talking about. And that's something we really need to reflect on. I need to reflect on, we need to reflect on, to understand what is this great lady's maqam. Mullah Sadra, who's giving al-Asfar al-Arba', which is still studied in the Hawza, and the 4 journeys and all of these transcendental philosophy, he is saying, when I had my biggest difficulties, I'm going to Masuma al-Qum to resolve my issues. This is who this person is. Do we know her reality in full context? Perhaps we will never know in this dunya, maybe in the akhirah. Nonetheless, tonight, it being a night where we commemorate this great personality, let us turn our hearts and our minds to her remembrance. Bibi Fatima al-Masuma, the sister of Imam al-Rada, she heard the news that her brother had been summoned and he was not returning, because the Imam himself had indicated this. And she, as a sister, she wanted to see her brother, not only as a sister, but also as the Imam of her time. And she embarked on this journey with some followers and believers to go towards the meeting of the Imam. She was not able to get all the way there according to certain narrations. But she eventually went towards Qum, and eventually she was left this world in that state where she went towards Qum. This was the love and the affection. As the poet says, this brother and this sister, it seems that they remind of another brother and a sister. What does the poet say? The poet says, जब भी मैं क़ुम गया मशहद की फ़ज़ा से पहले, जब भी मैं क़ुम गया मशहद की फ़ज़ा से पहले, यूं लगा शाम गया करब बला से पहले, यूं लगा शाम गया करब बला से पहले. There's one sister who's in Qum, there's another brother who's in Mashhad, Bibi Fatima al-Masuma, Imam al-Rada. One is in Qum, one is in Mashhad. The same way, there is one sister in Sham, there is one brother in Karbala. But their separation, these brother and sister could not be apart. Ajrukum ala Allah. They say that eventually there came a moment in time where that Da'bal al-Khizai, the poet of the court of Imam al-Rada, he was reciting a Marsiya, and he was saying how strange and how tragic is the story of the Ahlul Bayt. Someone is buried in Medina, and someone is buried in Kufa and Najaf, and someone is buried in Karbala, and someone again in Medina, and he goes one by one. Eventually he says someone is buried in Baghdad. At that point the Imam stops him. He says, Da'bal, add a line to this poetry. He says, Yabna Rasulillah, what shall I add? He says, and say that one and some are buried in Tus. He says, Yabna Rasulillah, I don't know who is this buried in Tus. He says, that is me. I will be buried in Tus, in this land, as a stranger away from home. He added the line. The people began to cry, and when they began to cry, they say that a cry came out. Stop the recitation. They say a sister, perhaps another sister of the Imam, has fallen unconscious on hearing the line of her brother being killed and dying in this era and this state. I would say 1,000 salams on you, O sister of Imam al-Rada. Magar azadaro do jumle. Ye ek bibi thi जिन्होंने फकत ये सुना कि भाई तूस में मदफून होगा, दफन होगा, मगर करबला में एक और ही माजरा था. अभी आपने मरसिये में सुना, क्या सुना? एक बहन थी जिसने खत लिखा था, और वो खत में क्या लिखा था? गोया कहते हैं कि जब कासिद बीबी सुगरा, जब उसने खत लिखा, जब बीबी ने खत लिखा और कासिद आया, गोया शहादतें हो चुकी थी, सब शहीद हो चुके थे. इमाम अपने आखिरी मराहिल में थे, अभी आखिरी जंग के लिए जाने वाले ही थे शायद, कि कासिद सुगरा आया. इमाम ने देखा, बीबी ने सलाम किया, फिर मुखातिब किया इमाम हुसैन को, फिर मुखातिब किया अली अकबर को. गोया इमाम ने खत लिया हो शायद और कहा हो, ए अली अकबर, लाश अली अकबर के पास करीब आए हो, और कहा है अली अकबर, बहन का खत आया. सल्लल्लाहु अलैका या रसूल अल्लाह, सल्लल्लाहु अलैका या अमीर अल-मुमिनीन, सल्लल्लाहु अलैकी या फातिमा अज़-ज़हरा सय्यदत निसा अल-आलमीन, सल्लल्लाहु अलैका या हसन अल-मुज्तबा. अस्सलामु अला अल-हुसैन व अला अली इब्न अल-हुसैन व अला औलाद अल-हुसैन व अला अस्हाब अल-हुसैन. मातम हुसैन या हुसैन हुसैन.
Yasin, 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 Yasin. ऐ मोमिनो लो फातिमा कुम्मी गई जग से, भाई के अलम से मोमिनो लो फातिमा मी गई जग से भाई के अलम से सदमा हुआ साज से उठ गई जग से भाई के अलम से ऐ मोमिनो लो फातिमा कुम्मी गई जग से भाई के अलम से या रब न किसी भाई बहन से हो जुदाई जिगर फटता है गम से उठा है चैन दिल का नहीं लुत्फ जीने में भाई के अलम से ऐ मोमिनो लो फातिमा कुम्मी गई जग से भाई के अलम से ये दाग जरा फातिमा कुम्मी से तो पूछे इस सख्त अलम को ये दाग जरा फातिमा कुम्मी से तो पूछे इस सख्त अलम को क्या दिल पे गुजरती है भला इस जुदाई से भाई के अलम से मोमिनो लो फातिमा कुम्मी गई जग से अलम से अफसोस वो किस शौक से निकली थी वतन में मिलने को भाई से और यहाँ तो मिला दाग जुदाई का जिगर पे भाई के अलम से ऐ मोमिनो लो फातिमा कुम्मी गई जग से भाई पहुँची जो कुम्मे तो मिला अफसोस ये पैगाम मारे गए इमाम सुनते ही वो गश कर गई इस सख्त खबर से भाई के अलम से ऐ मोमिनो लो फातिमा कुम्मी गई जग से भाई के अलम से रहमल्लाहु मन करा सूरतुल मुबारकतुल फातिहा बिस्मिल्लाह अस्सलामु अलैका या रसूल अल्लाह अस्सलामु अलैका या अमीरुल मोमिनीन व सय्यिदुल वसीय्यीन अस्सलामु अलैका या फातिमतुज़ ज़हरा सय्यिदती निस्साइल आलमीन अस्सलामु अलैका या खदीजतुल कुबरा अस्सलामु अलैका या हसनल मुज्तबा अस्सलामु अलैका या अबा अब्दिल्लाहिल हुसैन व अलल अरवाहिल्लती अल्लत बिफिनाइक व नाखत बिरहलिक अलैकुम मिन्नी जमीअन सलामुल्लाहि अबदम मा बकीत व बकियल लैल वन नार वला जअलल्लाहु आखिरल अहदि मिन्नी लिज़ियारतिकुम अस्सलामु अलल हुसैन व अला الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين السلام عليكم يا أئمة المسلمين علي بن الحسين ومحمد بن علي وجعفر بن محمد وموسى بن جعفر وعلي بن موسى محمد بن علي وعلي بن محمد والحسن بن علي السلام عليك يا حجة الله يا ابن الحسن يا صاحب الزمان أجل الله لك ما وعدك من الناس وظهور الأمر ورحمة الله وبركاته بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم كن لوليك الحجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك طوعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين.